day 2. So far, this has just been a knock it out of the park day. So looking forward for this no pressure, guys. So last third session for today is obviously vendor relationships, something we definitely can't live without. So I'm looking forward to this conversation. I will go ahead and turn this over to Mike, Craig, and Eric.
Thanks, Joe. Good afternoon, everyone. We're super happy to be with you this afternoon. We'll do some quick introductions. I've been on a couple times already, so those of you who've been watching, probably know me already. But I'm Mike Peterson. I'm the Audiovisual Experience Manager here at Iowa State University in Ames, Iowa. I do have some unique experience regarding vendor relationships, in that I spent about 19 years as a AV systems integrator before I flipped over to the higher ed side. And so it's I've seen both sides of the coin, and so I think we'll be able to get some good conversation going. So, Craig.
Absolutely. My name is Craig Shibley. I am the Audiovisual Services Manager at California Baptist University, doing live events, things like that, lectures, special events. But actually in the new year, I will be the Director of Multimedia Services here at California Baptist University, so more switching over to the academic AV side. That being said, one of the reasons I wanted to be on this vendor relationship panel is because I'm not good at it. I want to learn. I want to have a spot where I can throw in the questions. I'm learning. I'm doing better. But this is one of the reasons I wanted to be a part of this as we're steering HETMA along.
And so you have some big shoes to fill there, don't you, at CBU?
That's right. Yes, I'll be going down to Joe's old basement.
All right, Eric.
So I'm the procurement services specialist for information technology and audiovisual equipment here at Iowa State University. I work with Mike on a pretty regular basis. So the kind of division of labor the two of us have is Mike is really more the solutions architect, the person that's going out to our campus, figuring out what solutions we need. And then I am the vendor kind of contract administrator, relationship manager. So I kind of manage the relationship between us and the third-party suppliers that we have. And we use suppliers for integration. We use them for design. We also use them for parts and equipment, procurement as well. So it's a lot of different things, and in this industry in particular, so I also purchase for our IT, and I find the AV side is significantly more disparate in terms of where you can find solutions. It's not near as integrated together as a lot of the infrastructure IT that I work on. So there's just a lot more management to do with respect to providing adequate, innovative, and workable solutions for our campus. So what we've really tried to focus on is how can we assimilate all these vendor relationships together, and Mike's been an integral part of that in terms of bringing everyone together and trying to figure out how we develop solutions that we can support internally, but also meet the needs of our campus.
So give a little bit about your background before you came to Iowa State.
So I actually worked as an AV integrator for small systems consumer side, a lot of project management, and then I worked in telecommunications for about 10 years. In my role there, I was operations manager, and then also presided over a large project that was essentially nationwide, redeveloping all of our training centers for a Fortune 1000 company that essentially was a cable telco. Mediacom Communications is the name of it. So worked hand in hand with our corporate environment, trying to develop what essentially was a lot of AV solutions, because we were trying to get to distributed training. In other words, training we could provide to technicians sitting in a truck, but also a virtual environment type of training. So that's really kind of helped me in this environment where we're trying to move towards a lot of distance learning relationships, distance learning students.
Yeah, I wanted you to give that background because I wanted to make some of my colleagues jealous and from other universities. My procurement person here at Iowa State University, he worked in AV in the past. He works very closely with me. We have a weekly team meeting for my team here and the audiovisual experience team. Eric comes to our weekly team meeting. I mean, that's the kind of relationship I have with my procurement person, and it is an amazing, amazing thing to have a procurement person who used to work in AV who works closely with me like that. So it is an amazing thing for us. So all right, so lots of things we want to talk about today. But you know, one of the things I wanted to talk about is, you know, what's a good vendor relationship look like, right? So I want to differentiate between having relationships that I will call transactional relationships versus having relationships that I would call partner relationships. And so Eric, Craig, I was just curious if you guys have any initial thoughts on how do we create partnership type relationships and avoid transactional type relationships?
From what I'm just recently starting to learn and be a part of is take advantage of the vendors that reach out and integrators, whoever they might be, but people that discuss something with you before you even bring up a project. I think that's been huge for me, and learning that that's even possible. I come from a state school background where everything had to be bid out, and it seemed harder to make relationships that way just because it seemed like you were always just trying to grab quotes instead of discuss with people and really learn. And I think that for me, what I've learned about the past 2 years is if you want to just ask for gear on paper, that's one email. But if you're able to have a relationship beforehand and really cast what your kind of vision is, then that's where the relationship comes into play. And that's where it's less transactional. Now you're working as a team with somebody to create a vision instead of here's items I'm requesting, give me the bill for it, and that's that. Sure, are there adapters that fall under that category? Absolutely, but not our bigger projects.
Yeah, so I think the one thing that comes up with this a lot is, and Mike and I are at a state school, so we have a significant amount of, you know, issues related to procurement that have to fall under guidelines that our regent group puts together for essentially ensuring that we're getting, you know, products at a competitive cost, services at a competitive cost. But one thing we talk about a lot, and we talk to our campus a lot too, is that just because it's the lowest cost doesn't mean it's the best solution for you. So it's in terms of driving the value to the organization rather than just driving towards lowest cost. Now, I have a lot of discussions with other state procurement people in different states at other institutions within our own regent group about how we can drive towards higher value. In other words, if we're getting 3 times the value at a slightly higher cost, we're actually getting better value for our students, for our instructors, for our campus. And I think one way you do that is that your discussions need to be integrative and not distributive. So in the procurement side of things, that's how we talk about, when we talk about negotiating with suppliers, you know, it's a distributive negotiation. Is like you go to buy a used car, you're probably never buying a used car there again. So it doesn't matter what the relationship is between you and the salesman, and the salesman conversely feels the same way. He just wants to sell you a car, but he wants to sell you a car at the best possible price for him. And you're trying to get the best possible price for you. So that generally is the brinksmanship. So what we've tried to do here is have a more integrative approach, try to find win-win scenarios, stuff that they want to do, but also stuff that we need done. And in that case, we can generally find a pretty good balance point in terms of what the cost is going to be. But in order to do that, you really have to define what the values are for your university or for your institution. That's the harder part. And it's something Mike and I mean, it's an ongoing process too. It's something Mike and I work, you know, on a weekly or monthly basis with our pro staff on campus, trying to determine, hey, what are we seeing value in? Where should we push harder in terms of either lowering costs or increasing value? And then in turn, I relay that back to our group of suppliers and go, okay, here's what we're hearing from our campus. So how can we address these issues in a value-driven way? Knowing that cost is a factor, but knowing that value is a more important factor to us, because value saves costs in the long term. So, and my director here and our Regent group have really let us go, towards that process rather than reverse auction cheapest possible cost for this item, which we see in a lot of other Regent groups across the country. And that just generally doesn't work because you're pulling so much margin out of it on your supplier side that they're not going to show up to support that equipment. They're not going to help you with RMA. They're not going to help you squeeze OEMs and equipment manufacturers. They're not going to do that because there's nothing in it for them at that point.
And something to add on top of that is that being in higher ed, for the most part, we all know our pricing for the boxes. We should be able to get that directly from the manufacturer. We should be able to see that. And so something that will really differentiate then is as long as you're giving me the right pricing on the boxes and not trying to go over there, I will pay for higher skilled labor. I will pay for people that I can trust to do the vision of each department or whatever is going along. The labor side, those prices are going to vary because you're going to need different skills for different things. But knowing, okay, I know the price for a black box. What is the value then of what I'm paying for the other things?
Right, and to build on that, Craig, I think the other thing is a lot of times what we find that drives our labor cost up is where the hours are, not necessarily where the expertise is. So what we've done a lot here is said, you know what, where we value the labor where it's really skilled is on the engineering side, on the AV solutions creation side. So we're willing to pay more for those. But in turn, integratively, we're going to negotiate your installation labor down because that stuff, it can be done by, a lower skilled worker. But when we get to the point where everything's hooked up and everything's installed and ready to go, now our engineering labor comes back in. But what you'll find and what Mike and I have found, and I don't have the exact numbers on it right now, but in a lot of our projects, labor's around between, what do we say, Mike, 25 to 35% of the cost. The installation labor, as a general rule, is around, say, 15 to 20% of that cost. Well, if you can carve yourself out a 20 or 15 to 20% discount on your installation labor, you're going to be saving a pretty penny even if your engineering labor goes up. So that's one thing we've looked at is there's a division between labor and equipment supplies, and your integrators always have a little more negotiating power over their labor, right, because it's their people. But there's also that interdivisional piece of your labor contract, which is your installation people versus your highly skilled AV professionals like Mike, like Craig, like Joe. Those people, you're going to end up, if you pay them more and you get good people, you're going to make that back in the long run as a general rule. In fact, a lot of times it cuts down on your installation labor because the solution is better designed, so there's less actual wire to pull in a lot of situations. There's less complete redundancy that you don't need, those type of things.
Yeah, that's all great. That's all great. So as part of building this relationship, this partner relationship, what are some of the things that we as university AV staff or procurement agents would really want our integrator partners to know, right? What are some things that we would like them to be thinking about, to know about how we do business or what our needs are? And then I'm going to flip that around and I'm going to play from the integrator. I'm going to put my integrator hat back on from a couple of years ago, and we're going to flip that around and talk about some things I think integrators really like the AV staff to know. But so what are some things from an AV side? What would we really like integrators or our vendors to know about us?
Well, I think something to keep in mind is to a vendor and an integrator, we're the end user. But to all the people we work with on our campus, we're essentially the integrator. It's a really weird relationship in that who we are and who we are. I think it was Scott Tyner, correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, guys, but I think it's Scott Tyner who says we're in-house integrators. And that's just a really great term. And that's really different. So I think as we discuss higher ed as opposed to the private sector, I think that is a really unique thing in that If I talk to the person who works with me at my campus, I am the integrator, and I have to explain as an integrator. If I'm talking to the integrator, I'm discussing it and they're discussing with me as I'm the end user. And I think that's very unique in how our hats just change just by who we're talking to. And in that sense, I feel it's unique in how we really need to be almost more of a team with whatever outside help, with whatever outside vendor and integrators we're working with, because in the end, their work reflects directly on us because we look like the integrators to the people who are writing the checks and getting the POs and doing all of those things.
Yeah, no, that is absolutely correct. You know, and one of the things that, you know, I think, you know, we should be, and this depends, I guess, from my perspective, we from the AV side should be wanting to make that direct connection from the actual end user to our integrator partner, right? We should not be trying to serve as the blocker in that case, or the filter. You know, I've heard some people call it funnel filter, right? We shouldn't be doing that. We should be helping make the direct connection. Now, again, we want to stay in the loop because we want to be aware of what's going on, but we need to be helping the integrator get to the actual end user, because the integrator is going to want to know what the end user is really going to want for their solution.
Yeah, so one thing Mike's done since he's been here at Iowa State is put together a group of what we call AV pros. And these are people from across campus who are AV centric. A lot of them are IT people that also kind of have dual functionality. They wear a couple different hats. And of course, we've seen AV encroach on IT and vice versa over the last 10 years or so. But one thing that's helped do is identify for us who the people we can lean on to get information, but also the people we can lean on to help facilitate those conversations with suppliers. I think the biggest issue we have with what Mike is saying is kind of pushing the integrator side down towards our actual end users. And I do agree that that's the best route to go, in that a lot of times we find they're not speaking the same language. So we have to be able to facilitate that. And I think that's where you don't want to be viewed as a bottleneck, but you do want to be viewed as a facilitator. In other words, let me help facilitate this conversation for you so I can make sure that you're communicating what you want to communicate and the integrator is hearing what you want them to hear, and then vice versa, that the integrator is providing solutions, so we don't have a mismatch in priorities and we don't have a mismatch in identification of solutions.
Yep, absolutely. So, one of the things for me, again, I would say, one of the things is and maybe this is because I'm old fashioned, but I would like my integrators and vendors to come meet me. I really like to do business in person. I want to know you. I want to shake your hand. And so, don't be a stranger from campus. Don't think you can build a long-standing business relationship with me just remotely via email or phone calls. I really want you to come see me. So I know. Craig, do you find vendors coming to visit you, or do you think that they're trying to build relationships remotely with you? So
I've gotten both. Got a lot of people visiting. What I don't like is the stock email or the stock phone call. It's amazing how many of those came my way the minute Joe left CBU. But the people that reach out and kind of know what we do, it's been a lot better. Something that I recommend is, and this is something I had to learn, it wasn't something that come natural for me. When you do the trade shows, people are there to speak to you. They're not just there to stand by their booth and stare blankly for a while. When you go to Infocom or any of the other smaller ones that are out there, people are there to talk to you. And it's not about, they're not going to start right then and there looking to get a date down for what they're going to install. They're going to get to know you and what you do on campus and how they can help. And maybe they have something you've never heard of before. So I think that's a big deal to be able to have those conversations early. So 6 months, a year, when it happens, like, oh, I remember who had a solution for that.
Yep, that's great. So, so again, we talked about this earlier in the AV as a service session, but one of the things that I think integrators that we would want integrators to know is that if we have our own in-house integration firm, and we've talked about that we're in-house integrators, that in many cases we can do it for less money than they can. And I just want them to be aware of that so they can come in knowing up front, and so then, come to you with, all right, so we know that, for your run-of-the-mill AV solutions, you guys are going to be an in-house integrator. We get that. Here's how we can partner with you on that. But have you thought about this, these other aspects of your business that maybe we can come in and do some better relationships or work with you better on that? So, one of the things we talked about is, for example, the summer crunch, right? I am probably not going to staff up to be able to do all of the AV work that I probably need done over our summers, because that's our prime time to get upgrades done. And so let's talk about, how can we build a relationship where you can, provide an assistance to us on our summer side.
I think it's something as big as when we look at what's being presented to us is that we can't just go off of what's the best thing. We have to go off of what we can support. So if we can't install it ourselves, we have to be able to support it ourselves. And that's something that's really important about that relationship with the vendor. So as you look at, let's say, the summer crunch, into your question, to be able to make sure as we're ahead of things, what can we do in-house? What is going to be that August push? And knowing that we can't get that in, but is that something that we can look to a vendor on that knows what we're doing? Is this something that's worked with us before, that it's not about, okay, we're starting from scratch and repulling, that we can be able to say, okay, we've had this relationship. Maybe you didn't do the install, but you've been on campus enough to know what we have, or we've had enough phone conversations to really piece that together. So when you get here, your feet are on the ground and you're moving. And we're not taking that time, because then it's not the summer crunch, and then it becomes a whole new project if we have to explain everything from the get-go.
Yeah, and from a procurement perspective, you need to let your procurement people know what specific needs that you have. Like, if you have needs you can't cover, all right, well, let's go find an integrator contract or a service contract that can help you out with those items. For Mike's purposes, he doesn't need a lot of necessarily engineering labor on some of these smaller contracts, but he does need some installation people. Okay, so let's go find some firms. Let's go get a time and materials contract for those type of solutions, those type of installations that we can spin up whenever we need to. We can develop a standing 80 hours a week over this number of months in the summertime. Those are things that are all possible through a procurement process. It's just identifying what those needs are, identifying firms that could capably do it, and then, we may have to go through the RFP route and go that way. A couple things I'm seeing on the chat here that I want to address a little bit. One is how to deal with cold calls for integrators. There's no good way of doing that. What I can tell you is that here at Iowa State, what we did was we bid an actual integrator contract. And we sent the bid document, the RFP document, out to everybody. And it covers, I would say, 80% of the projects we do on campus. The other 20% are going to be capital investment in projects. Those are huge dollars, $500,000, $1 million plus. Those almost always go to bid here, just because of how our capital project structure works and how those projects have to be allocated from a procurement perspective. But in terms of cutting down on the cold calls, I think you'll find pretty quickly, if you compete that contract every 3 to 5 years, and Mike and I are discussing potentially doing something similar to that this spring, that you will cut down on the cold calls significantly, because at that point you have an integrator contract for campus, you push that out to the campus groups, so they're less likely to go call out for services on their own, for starters. And secondly, the people who would be cold calling you had an opportunity to bid and win the contract once, and they know they'll have an opportunity to bid and win the contract again. So I think that helps to cut down on some of that, because you can have that working relationship. Hey, this integrator has this contract for now. We will likely compete it again in 2 to 3 years, maybe 5 years. At that point, there will be an opportunity to get some more business here. If we have other projects that come up that are out of the scope of the current integrator we have, those projects will also be competed, and you'll have an opportunity for those as well. But if they know that the procurement side is not going to award contracts to them, they're not going to bother making cold sales calls to people, because I have the beautiful thing called purchase authority here at the university. So I'm the bottleneck, essentially. If you want to buy something, it has to come through me or from our department. So if we can cut down on the onesies, and that's the thing, is the onesies and twosies are what get you in trouble. Because 1 or 2 people work with an integrator off contract, and now that integrator thinks they can get business elsewhere as well. So trying to enforce those kind of campus standards around contracts really helps you in that area.
And just to clarify a little bit, at least not to speak for everybody else, but at least for myself, I do kind of lump together cold call and bad cold call as the same thing. And what I mean by that is, when it comes to cold calling, the stock, here's what we can do for you phone calls when I've never met you, that I don't like so much as someone saying, hey, can I meet you? What is it that you need? What are you looking to do? Can we see what already exists? And yes, so that's more, to me, I say, is building the relationship, as opposed to here's my first phone call, here's what I can sell you, or here's everything about us. Let's start the relationship, and then you can learn about me, I can learn about you.
Yeah, and relationship building starts with knowing your end users as well. Right. If they're unhappy with your current contract, they're going to try to go elsewhere.
Yeah.
We've run into that here. So we've tried to, all right, what needs are not being met here? And let's see if we can address those. And if you know your end users, I would say, I don't know, Mike, you tell me, but between the two of us, my assumption is we get tipped off on the majority of cold calls from our own end users. Hey, this guy tried to call me and sell me X. I don't want to not call him back because it does sound interesting. Could you make a phone call on my behalf? I get a lot of those from our campus because they know, one, we're present. We know who our end users are. They know who we are. So, if I was talking to procurement people here, I would say, get out in the world and know who your end users are. And they'll help you sort of manage the relationship piece of this somewhat, so that you at least have some visual acuity as to who is contacting your end users, who is trying to get business from your institution.
Yeah, absolutely. It's interesting. One of the things that we flipping to the integrator side, when I worked as an integrator, one of the things that we would try and find out early on when we were having relationships with the university is what is their procurement process. And it's actually, at least for a public university side, it's to your benefit to share that as openly as possible with the integrator. Help educate them on what your procurement process is at your institution. It's going to do them a whole bunch of favors. They're going to fully understand what they're into, what they're up against, and it's going to do you a favor. If you don't understand the procurement process at your own institution, then that's a problem too. You need to make sure that you fully understand, hey, what is the process? How is this going to get bid? What are the limits where you can put it out to bid or not? You need to understand those things.
Yeah, and additionally, it's not always that your direct procurement process either. There's a lot of times a separate process for construction. So here at Iowa State, we have a $50,000 bid limit on basically anything you might want to buy. But on top of that, there's also a $100,000 small project limit and a $1 million capital project limit, and those limits are statutory. In other words, if we go over those amounts, they have to be bid, and they have to be bid a certain way, sometimes through RFQ or RFB or IFB. So knowing those things helps too, and consolidating as much of that information as you can into one place where you can point someone to it and go, okay, this is how you get university contracts. That is always really helpful in terms of kind of, one, slowing the process down. In other words, the IT guy you called in the business college, he can't buy anything from you directly. So you're wasting your time going that direction, whereas if you work through me, I can actually get your name to everyone on campus if it's something that is of interest to other people. And that's the chicken egg thing for them. They want to always get their solutions in front of your people. But the issue is that the people that they get solutions in front of then can't buy them and then have to go to bid. And now everybody's angry. And it's because of how we started the conversation. So part of that vendor relationship piece is going out in the world and trying to figure out who those suppliers are that might have some interest in your campus community. Mike does that really well for us because he attends a lot of the conferences. So he'll come back and say, hey, I saw these 5 products. Let's look for people who sell these 5 products, and let's get some demonstrations started. Let's see if there's some interest on campus with these, because I think there's a need here. And then I facilitate that demonstration, and we kind of work together in that way. So if you have a good relationship with your procurement office, and I would strongly suggest you do, just as a procurement person, for the most part, we try to reach out as much as we can. Not every procurement department's the same, but actually I have a presentation with our National Association of Educational Procurement coming up in March that talks a lot about this type of AV procurement process and how you can help your AV professionals on campus and stuff like that. So those of you at major universities that attend that conference, hopefully you'll have some procurement people coming back with some eyes open on this stuff, later this spring.
All right. Another thing, as I'm thinking through this, we're still, the high level topic we're still kind of covering is what are some of the things that we would like integrators or vendors to know about us. One of the things that we need to be thinking about on the AV side in-house at a university is know your own limits, right? Know what your team is good at, what your team is not going to, be able to do good at, and be open and honest with your vendor partners about, hey, here's where I think we can handle this in-house, but here are hey, we're going to be out of our scope. We're not going to be understanding this. For example, one of the things that we're doing right now, we are building a new building, and the whole thing's going out to bid. But part of that is kind of a broadcast suite. And the fact of the matter is, my team, we just don't really have the necessary expertise in that area, And so we right away knew that this is something that we're going to have outside help on. It's outside of our expertise, and so. A little humility on your side, and knowing, hey, this is really outside of our knowledge base and understanding, and here's the areas where we're good at, but here's the areas where we're really gonna probably need some help on, and sharing those with your partners as well. So.
Yeah, especially if you've done a lot on your own up to that point, people that you work with may not understand why you can't do that other part as well. So being able to justify on both ends what you do, what you don't do to your end user, but also to the vendor.
Yep, a little humility. So it goes a long way. So let's flip this around. And Eric, I guess you've been on an integrator side too. So let's go to put a little historical basis on this and put our integrator hats on. What are some of the things that we would really want AV professionals on campuses or AV procurement agents on campus to know about us from an integrator side?
Well, one thing when I was running a quote desk that we always struggle with was, where are my opportunities? What are the opportunities I have in a specific campus? And who do I talk to that would have would be the leverage point, the Archimedes lever for giving me access to all of those opportunities, or the majority of those opportunities? So, to the extent that you can become that for an integrator, that's really helpful. Why would they want to cold call some guy they've never met over in business who doesn't understand AV, but probably supports the AV systems in that college? There's no sense in talking to that guy if they can talk to you instead. So part of building that relationship piece is, hey guys, I am the one to come talk to, because I can tell you where you have some opportunities to sell here. And I can tell you right away if you're selling a solution that we can't support and we're not going to buy. And that way you're not wasting your time trying to make sales here where there's no sales to be had. Because one thing I hated as a quote desk is bidding on projects I had no chance to win. I mean, there's a fair amount of that in any time you're running a desk like that. But the issue is, like, if I have absolutely no opportunity, I am absolutely wasting my time. So if I know ahead of time, hey, this is something I have an opportunity to win, then that's good for me from an integrator side.
Yep. Absolutely.
What about past the bidding process, and you've won a bid? What are ways that we in higher ed can be better customers to the integrators and vendors?
Well, I know what my answer would be, Mike, and it's writing up those statements of functionality. So Mike and I really put that process into place here, where if you're doing an AV project here, we don't want you to write a set of specs. We want you to write a statement of what you want the space to do, because people don't know what capabilities are. We might have 15 different ways of accomplishing one task. In an AV, that is absolutely true. So can you tell me what you want to do with the space? What is the space going to be used for? If it's a multifunction space, what are the different functions of the space? And who might be using them? Who would be the end users? Who would be the instructors if it's a classroom space? Are they going to be technically proficient? How much training are we going to have to do? Those are the type of things that your integrators really want to know. And I'll let Mike even kind of build on that point a little bit.
Well, yeah, I mean, a quality integrator, one of the first things that they're going to do is come in and do what we used to refer to as a needs analysis. And it's to gather all those very things, right? So, you know, one of the questions I used to ask when I was on the integrator side when I meet with a customer is, okay, so from the time an individual enters the room to the time they leave, describe the experience you want them to have. You know, what are your goals for the time that they're in the room? What do you hope to accomplish? What would a successful meeting look like, or a successful class look like, or whatever's occurring in that meeting, or in that space? Describe what success looks like from that space. You know, don't come to me necessarily and say, hey, I need, you know, this kind of projector. I need this kind of. No, I want to know what you, because if you can tell me what the use cases are, if you can tell me what the experience you want the person to have is, then I can, you know, again, I can be very finesse with how we design the audiovisual system to meet your needs.
Yeah, and one thing you'll find too, if you're in higher ed, is that the people who are using your spaces are really adept at writing papers and white papers and classroom content. So if you ask them to write a story, they're more than happy to do that for you. If you ask them to write you a set of specifications, they're like, oh, crap, I don't want to do all this garbage. I don't know anything about this. But if you tell them to write you a story, tell me a story about how you're going to teach in this, way more likely to get good feedback from them. And additionally, if you have, you know, switching gears a little bit, if you have a campus standard for equipment, have that communicated somewhere. Put that up on a website. Put that in every RFP, RFQ you do. Even if you don't have a set of specifications on equipment, if you have a desired, like say you can't set a campus standard, but you'd like to have one, well, what's my desired outcome here? What equipment would I like to work on? Because one thing we found is that, like, we're an Extron campus for the most part. Well, you're going to have a set of integrators who do Extron and Crestron, but you're going to have a lot of integrators that maybe only work on Crestron, or that's where their modus operandi is, that's what they want to do. In that case, they're not going to bid your project if you're an Extron, and it helps from the perspective of, you know what you're going to get then, and the people who don't want to do that type of work are simply not going to bid your project a lot of the time.
Yeah, and in cases where we put bids out where we can't, where we don't have a specific brand or model of campus standard, we might have some brand or model that we would call, you know, our kind of our quality level, right? So this is the, you know, the quality basis for flat panels on campus is, you know, Samsung, or, you know, NEC or Panasonic, we might say, or something like that, right? So, you know, that's the kind of the quality level we're looking at. Even if we can't give a specific make and model as a standard in some cases. So, and that helps them too understand what, you know, kind of where you're at. You know, what are you looking at and what are you looking for? So,
one thing that prevents is a lot of times somebody come in with a dirt cheap bid with dirt cheap equipment in it, because if they if they know what the quality you're expecting is, then they know they have to meet that certain quality, and they got to be commensurate with it. And if they aren't, then they're not going to be considered. I mean, that's one thing we talk about in our RFPs and RFQs. You better bid equipment that's of equal quality to this. If you bid stuff that is cheap and not commercial quality, for example, then we're not going to consider you even if you are the lowest cost. So many integrators think that they need to be the lowest cost. I think that's another thing to communicate, is that we're looking for value solutions, not necessarily the lowest cost, and we're going to rank, file, and score all of your proposals based on that. Assuming your procurement process allows you to evaluate RFPs in that fashion, then it's good to communicate that with your RFP documentation. In other words, let them know you do not have to be the lowest cost. Cost is a factor for sure, but you don't have to be the lowest cost. We can award to the non-lowest cost if we feel like the value is better for us.
Eric, I have a question regarding that. Do you guys have a formal grading system when it comes to proposals that come in to be able to compare, other than gut feeling to say this is a little bit more expensive but we like it more? What are standards and procedures we can follow so it's more of an apples to apples comparison with value and cost?
So we have a weighted scoring matrix here. So like cost will be weighted on a scale of 1 to 5 or 1 to 10. And then we'll rank each proposal based on a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 score. You multiply the two together, and that gets you kind of a weighted score for that specific vendor. Then you add all the weighted scores together and kind of see who's winning at that point. So that's sort of how we handle it. And what we try to do here also is when we bid something like that, we weight the scores ahead of time before we get proposals back. So we're not essentially driving towards one specific vendor or another. It's independent. We don't even know who's bid yet, but we've already put our scoring matrix together. And some of the things that we would put in there, quality of previous installations as evidenced by references, quality of equipment proposed would be another one. And, you could put a gradation scale together on equipment quality. You can look at, okay, well, who proposed higher end commercial equipment to me and who didn't, right? And I can score one higher there or the other. Another thing is on the labor side, how many skilled people do they have? So like when we bid our Cisco contract, we look at how many CCIEs do they have on staff in the region, because those are the resources we're going to need. So for AV, you might look at Avixa. How many Avixa certified engineers do they have? Do they have multiple? Do they have one? What's the size of their shop? How many skilled personnel do they have? How many dedicated support personnel might I get? Those are things that you should be looking at, but also you should be evaluating, what matters to me as an institution, and then making sure that you take those values and you put them in your RFP and you state, these are the things that matter to us as an institution. So if you want to win a contract with us, these are the things that you're going to have to provide. And if you can't, we strongly suggest you don't bid. If you can, then keep in mind, we're going to look at how you do so, and we're going to evaluate you on that versus your competitors. And in a perfect world, we would always end up with the perfect solution. And then sometimes we do, sometimes we don't, unfortunately. But it's an iterative process. We're learning all the time. I mean, Mike and I have learned a lot just in the last year and a half about how to do this better. We look at our mistakes, and we're like, yep, we should have done that differently. And then we adjust the process the next time around. But what we don't do is keep that to ourselves. We're constantly talking with our user base on campus about how we can improve things. So as long as you do that and you're interfacing, I think your job becomes a little bit easier. It becomes more to manage for sure, but I do think it becomes easier for you.
And especially as we look at, like I said, how can we be better as customers? That's a great thing to look at to help us. Because as much as we want to say, it's not all about cost. As much as we want to say that can be the only tangible thing we're looking at sometimes, at least when it comes to justification to the people who give us the go. And so to be able to have that kind of standard and be able to, and from there, actually write better RFPs, right? Because if we know what our standards are, what we're going to score off of, now our RFPs are better. Now we're much better customers and have that, we're doing our part of the relationship with the vendors, because a bad relationship is always going to, there are two sides of it. We can't just always put things on the other end if something goes wrong. So that's a great way for us to be much, much better customers to the vendor.
That's all great. That's all great. So one of the things I would want to make sure that, as an integrator, one of the things I would want to know is help me out, help make the connections to your facilities team and your IT team. Because especially if we're doing integrated projects, it really is, it's a whole team-based approach, right? And in many cases, the AV departments roll up under IT, in which case that makes that much easier. But in many cases, it's not, right? So from an integrator side, I would want to know, hey, please help me make connections, not just to your AV team, but also to your IT team and to your facilities team, because there's so many aspects of what we're going to be doing with you that we really want you to make those types of connections. And that kind of goes to something that you asked, Richard, is Craig and Mike, he asked, do you always receive architectural design documents for review on capital projects? Or who is the intermediary on a campus that makes the connection with the A&E team? So this is something that we're actually actively working on right now at Iowa State. We're dramatically trying to improve this process. When I came in, that's certainly one of the things that was high on my priority list to build a really strong working relationship with our facilities planning and management team, and we're certainly attempting to do that. I think prior to me joining, I think there maybe was in many cases little or no oversight from the AV team on reviewing some of the architectural design documents for capital projects, but that's changed dramatically in the last 18 months. And I think we still have a long way to go. There's still lots of areas for improvement there on my side as much as on the facility side. Partnership yet.
But we're talking now, which we weren't before.
Yes.
So before Mike was here, we had a solutions-oriented group that was basically focused on support. I mean, we were doing a little bit of installation, but it was essentially just a support function. They were supporting general university classrooms, and that was pretty much it. We kind of reoriented that team here, and that has really helped. And really, our facilities group has been instrumental in well, we don't know anything about this crap either. We would really like to have some help here, and we've sort of broken down the barriers there, which has been helpful, at least here. So, somebody asked a question. I think it's Joe. Hardest thing transitioning. One of the things I would say on that front is that from a transition perspective, what was easiest for me is that I came from the contracts world and I ended up in the contracts world, right? So from that perspective, it hasn't been too difficult. I think the hardest thing here is really trying to identify who the stakeholders are. As on the integrator side, I could always kind of tell at the end of the day that the person I was going to have to deal with was kind of bubbling up towards the top. And would be the one interfacing with me most of the time. Here, it's very different, and it's significantly different per project. It's a different group of stakeholders every time. So that's been the biggest transition for me, is trying to figure out who those people are and what their needs are, because it's not always straightforward. I'm not dealing with an AV person all the time in a lot of cases.
And I'm going to add, I'm sorry, Mike, I'm going to add to talking about the looking at plans and are we able to see the documents for capital projects, and something that goes back to how to be better customers on our end is making sure we're in on those conversations as early as possible. A lot of times the facilities teams thinks they're bringing you in early, but they've already have the drawings done. They've already decided on size of conduit and routing of the conduit and things like that. And they're like, ground isn't broken yet. But, we're bringing you in early, but we're not realizing, no, we definitely are interested in where the conduit's going and how big it is, things like that. So one way to be better customers is to get on that as early as possible, because I've been in meetings where those things are decided and the vendor is there with our facilities teams, and I'm asking for things that just confuse both sides as to how we can try to accomplish none of that's been done. So making sure we're in as early as possible. Do we receive and review the documents on capital projects? Yes, but I'd like to say we should be a part of those drawings being done, that we should be a part of making sure we know where everything's going. And even if it isn't, we have power to say what everything is and where it goes, to have that knowledge early on to know what the space is capable of.
Yep. So Joe asked this question. Joe asked, this is to you and I, Eric. What's the hardest difference in transitioning from being an external integrator to an in-house integrator? What are some things you didn't understand before? And additionally, is there anything you completely misunderstood and see totally different? Well, yeah.
Well, Mike, those commission checks were really nice. I don't get those anymore. So that's been somewhat of a transition. But I think it's more who you're serving. Like, I don't necessarily know who all the people are here, but for the most part, we're an academic institution, so we're focused on serving students, serving the research community, and providing solutions to that end. So one thing that's kind of changed my impact here is that I'm not the one designing all the solutions, but at least I know the focal point of what we're trying to accomplish. And from a contracts perspective, that helps.
Yeah. It's actually interesting how many of the things are really the same from many perspectives. The needs analysis process, the quoting process, a lot of those things are actually very similar being an in-house integrator than it was as an external integrator. In fact, we just in the last 3 months, we went and got D-Tool software, which is kind of an in-house integrator design software, so that we can and that we're using that for our design work and quoting and things. Same software that integrator might use, and so in many aspects are the same. I think some of the things that are different, that are interesting, and some of the things that I've had to, and I'm still kind of working through, is how we're doing fee for service. A couple of things that come into play is we don't have any profit to play with from the perspective of if something goes wrong, if something breaks after we do the install, or if something breaks during the install, we really don't have any insurance. We don't really have any profit that we can draw from to fix those mistakes. I mean, we are truly a full 100% time and materials fee for service operation. When we come in and do an install on campus, if something breaks, that's on you. You're buying that, and that's very different, and that leads to very different conversations, and it's led to some really hard conversations on campus to have to help inform folk. Yeah. I'm sorry, I have to hate to break this to you, but we're still time and materials, even if we have to come back and fix it after the fact because we didn't do it right the first time. Mm-hmm. And I know it's disappointing to hear, but I still need your account number so that I can send you a bill for those hours that we put in. So, yeah. So
some issue I've had with dealing with vendors and dealing with projects, almost 100% of the time when I'm meeting them and talking to them, it's a great relationship. About 80% of the time through the bidding process, it's good and fine. And then that goes through the project. But I'm yet to experience where the project ends just completely smoothly. And let's call that the final mile, where the final mile of the project, I feel like I'm not getting the same attention. Maybe the person who I was speaking with before, doing the sales, doing whatever, is not giving me the attention they were giving before because now it's all techs on the job. And so I just want, from your guys' experience, one, as in your current positions in higher ed, but also coming from the other side, what are ways we can smooth the final mile, both on your end and the customer end?
That's a great question, and I wish I had a magic bullet for that, but I think that's something that we still significantly struggle with here on campus is that final mile question, right? So how do you close out projects cleanly? The fact of the matter is AV is a complicated business, right? And there's just a lot of moving bit pieces, and in many cases, it is tough to get every single thing done right up front, but and the other challenge actually this I think is almost harder in some respects from a higher ed perspective, because once you've kind of semi-turned over that space, especially if it's a learning space, to the client, coming back and getting those issues resolved, it's really painful because the room is in use large portions of the day.
Right.
And so you're really, now it's a whole lot of schedule negotiation. Is the integrator willing to come back in the evenings? Are you willing, is the campus willing to let the integrators come back in the evenings and work in those spaces? So, I think being in higher ed makes that even more challenging than a traditional project, just because that partial handoff of the project that may not be 100% done, but hey, it's good enough. Let's get this in production. Let's start getting classes in there. Now to come back and find the time to get all those things resolved, it's really painful. So,
yeah, one thing you can focus, there's a couple things here, I guess. One thing is really be honest about what your project timelines are and when your actual deadline dates are. And if your deadline date is August 1st, make sure you set your actual deadline to be July 1st, because you're likely going to need that 3 to 4 weeks to iron out any bugs or weird stuff that happens before, like, say, your classes start in August. I think the second thing is, and let me put my integrator hat back on, where's my margin coming from on these projects, guys? It's the majority of it's about what, 20 to 25% of the project. I got to pay everybody else before I pay myself. Well, as an institution, if I can hold that last 25% till final acceptance, they're not actually making any money until they're done. They might have some margin in there. They might have some overhead in there. But at the end of the day, they're not making their profit piece of it until the end, till the final project is completed. I think the other thing that tends to string you along in these situations, and we haven't touched on it at all here, which is sort of surprising to me, is change orders. Having a really good change order process at the beginning. So what is a change order? What constitutes a change order? And talking about how change orders are specifically for functionality that is additional and requested by the institution, or functionality that needs to be added in order to accommodate something that was in the original RFP, potentially has changed scope. So defining those using examples generally will help you in those situations, because as we all know, dealing with AV, and again, Mike and I have been on both sides of it, there's more change orders in this industry than there is in any other one I contract with. That includes broadcast telecommunications, that includes information technology and infrastructure. So one thing we run into a lot is, our integrator here is really good about change orders. Could it be better? Sure. But there's always gaps in your knowledge, gaps in your functionality. So the better you can design a change order process around what you value. Okay, so do I value the lowest possible cost, or do I value cost certainty? And, we could talk about that all day. But if you can figure out what's most valuable to you and design your change order process around that, I think that will help you get to completion a little faster.
And Eric, I think this also goes right back to what you were discussing before about equipment and functionality, that it's not just a matter of you knowing what equipment's going to go in there, but as you get close to the project, instead of looking at the equipment and somebody says, but does it do X? And it doesn't, that's when the change orders come in, that's when more time comes in, things like that. So better on our end to make sure we have functionality down just as much or even more than we have the specific equipment going in down, I think can really help eliminate change orders and therefore kind of help that final mile.
Yeah, that's true. I think one thing is, change orders are necessary. All the IT projects to do, we have change orders on. And they're even more necessary now than they were 15 years ago, because stuff change. I mean, you're going to start a project in 2 years, you might be done, but it might be 3 years before you're fully done. And you might have had a solution you designed 2 years ago. Technology changes. So there might be functionality changes that you have. But The only thing I can stress is that if you have a good change order process where you're being transparent about what you're asking for, and the vendor knows where the line is between, all right, we promised this functionality, we have to deliver it, and they requested additional functionality, they have to pay for it. Really defining where that line is very important. And it will, if you do that correctly and you have a good relationship with your vendors where you can discuss any potential brinksmanship issues, that's a really valuable tool in your toolkit in terms of getting projects done on time.
Then looking past the final mile, keeping a good relationship and make sure you do that part well helps, because at least in my experience, having multi-purpose rooms, things like that, we didn't realize what the room was going to be used for until we had the room. And then what the original idea was, different groups come in, clubs come in, professors come in for special lectures. And I'm like, oh, but could we, and then, because there might have people that may not have been in the conversation originally, as much as we try to get everybody in, not everybody gets a say in the capital project, but in the end, they are using the room and may have different ideas. So for us to be able to, when I say us as customers, us as higher ed customers, to be able to have a smooth final mile is so important, because in a year, if we want to add that 3, 5, 10% to the room or change, it'd be so much better to get that same vendor in instead of starting from scratch. But if we really mess up that change order process, frustrate them as much as they frustrate us, then we may not want that same vendor. But that means we're really starting from scratch when it comes to drawings and transfer of information and things of that nature.
Yep, and I think that goes back again, and that rolls all the way back to the beginning, right? How important it is to try and identify all the stakeholders. Again, we're never going to be perfect at it, but it's the more you can improve that art of being able to identify and get input from all the stakeholders early on in the project, that's really going to help minimize your change orders. We've dealt with projects here on campus where more or less money came in and they decided they were going to build a room or a space, but they didn't even know who the owner of the room was or what the space was going to be used for, but they just knew that they were going to make this cool space and they had all this money to spend on it, right? Those are like crazy difficult to to work on, because at some point, the problem is you get really far down the path in that, and then all of a sudden they decide who the stakeholders really are going to be, right. And now you're starting from scratch in some ways, trying to identify what the needs really are going to be at that point.
Well, yeah, and the money has to be spent by X date too. I mean, that's the other thing we run into a lot is like, well, I got to spend this by the end of the fiscal year, and it's our fiscal year's it starts July 1, and they're coming and talking to us on May 15th. I was like, well, sorry, that's just not going to happen. Kind of setting where the line is on those type of things too. And like Mike says, it's a hard road to hoe, because we just have lots of people, lots of awesome ideas on this campus, but we just can't do all of them. And there's got to be some limit as to where we kind of draw the line and like, okay, this is something we need to do, but we need to have X, Y, and Z first before we can really realistically get started on something.
And I would say, in defense of our end users, even myself, right? We don't know how a room is going to be used until it's used sometimes, right? People get ideas then, and there can even be a hesitation to use the room because people are saying, well, I want to know what the room is going to be for. I want to know, and then my response is, it's used for what you use it for. What do you envision in there? What can we do to help you in there? And so sometimes that's adding equipment that's temporary because we can't install something like that. But a lot of times it's, okay, I'm seeing 9 out of 10 times people want this functionality. Is it something that we need to add to the room at this point?
Yeah, and Craig, and one thing that helps with that on the integrator side and with your vendors is having a consistent solutions engineering group. So if you have to come back to a space, they sort of understand how it works. They sort of understand how it was designed initially. And that makes it easier to maybe drop a new functionality into that space because they're the ones that designed it initially, even if it was 2 years ago or 18 months ago. Now, obviously, there's going to be diminishing returns to that because people move on from jobs and so on and so forth. But if you have a consistent group, whoever your integrators are, that can be really helpful.
Yeah, that's good. All right. Craig, with all the great questions, man, I appreciate that. So you're
Totally, I wanted to hop on this one to learn more, not to give a ton of info.
no, that's fantastic. So looking back through some of the comments here. Let's see. Yeah, lots of people hopped on the change order things. Change orders must die. That's fantastic too.
Necessary evil is what I would call them.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Of course, Dean then asks, can we get shirts made up with hashtag change orders must die? So again, more AV swag ideas. All right,
that one we can wear to the next contract meeting, Mike.
Yeah, there you go.
Change orders must die. I'm sure they'll all appreciate that.
Perfect.
This is an interesting thought Aaron Peterson brought up on the chat here about how the primary owner moves to a new position, and then so that space is being used differently. Have you guys had that? What is the solution there? I know from a CBU standpoint, for the most part, we're standardized when it comes to classrooms. We have a lot of the same things. And if School of Nursing ever decided to move, it'd be a capital project just to move their technology and change it, and for our specialized departments. But for the most part, we don't really have that because we're pretty standardized across the board when it comes to what the equipment is. Have you guys run into that? Is that an issue over at Iowa?
Really, again, we're pretty similar to you. I know where Aaron's going with that because I'm familiar with McDonough. I used to work there actually, where Aaron works. He's thinking in many cases of very specific high-tech type spaces. They do a lot of virtual reality type spaces, those types of spaces. Yeah, and in many cases, you can build a really cool room that has a lot of high-tech functionality in it. You have some faculty person that's really engaged and really wants something. And so they put a lot of money in that, and then that faculty person moves along or gets interested in something else. And now all of a sudden you have a room there that has a lot of really cool functionality, capability in it, but no owner and no one who's really the champion is the term I would often use. Does this room have a champion? And so that room just gets underutilized and ends up not being a great use of money in the end. But those are things that just kind of come up along the way. But I can't think of that many specific spaces here on at Iowa State that are like that. But I know, having worked on the integrator side, that we did see that often. Right, we saw that a lot on unique spaces that we would do for people. So
yeah. So one instance I can think of here, Mike, is the Marston. Yeah, the high-end Marston classrooms. When we first completed those spaces, they were fairly innovative in terms of a pod classroom style approach where everything could be brought to the front and then pushed out to the side. If you've seen some of the new stuff coming from Mersive, we actually designed solutions that do exactly that, but we used a whole bunch of switching scaling to do it. What we found was the feedback on those rooms was terrible. The first 3 months, the people were in there. So we talked to our CELT group, and they sent a pedagogy expert, basically a guy with a doctorate in pedagogy and teaching instruction, into those rooms to watch the spaces. And all the negative feedback on those rooms was coming from instructors who wanted to stand at the front of the room and lecture. Well, those spaces weren't designed for that, but that was the courses that got scheduled into there. So what we did was we went to the facilities group and we went to kind of the classrooms group and the engineering college and said, hey, these are spaces that weren't designed for this. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for them to be teaching in these rooms because it's just a waste. We're not using the technology that's there. And the instructors who wanted to use that technology had rave reviews of those rooms. Now, there were some issues. There was an issue with the integrator itself that caused some problems. But the main one is I'm not using any of the technology, and this is a big waste of time. Well, yeah, it is, because your teaching style doesn't really use that specific type of space. So kind of matching up those really helps. And then also, if you're going to have someone who's teaching in that room consistently, like a champion, as Mike's saying, have them as part of the project team, have them as part of the evaluation group, the people who are writing those statements of functionality, have them involved with the integrator, because those are the people who you'll find they have lots of great ideas, and they like to be involved in the process of designing things to the extent that you can push them into that process. It's helpful.
Yep. Oh, that's great. So let's go around and let's just get some final thoughts here. Craig,
Yeah.
any final thoughts as we begin to wrap up this?
This has been great. I think the idea of just having our standards down and what our standards are, first of all, not only physically, the equipment wise to send to vendors, but also for how we evaluate RFPs. That was information that I never really thought about before, and I think that's fantastic. So that's my take home. My encouragement from this is, as much as we talked about bad cold calls and all that, at the same time, accept meetings with vendors, get that relationship going. And you may not have, it can be easy to say, well, nothing's really in the chute right now, so we don't really need to discuss it. No, have that conversation right then. It could be 18 months down the road. It could be longer than that. But get into contact with people, build that relationship, and then you'll know who you want to reach out for when you have a project coming up. So that's my biggest recommendation. And again, that's my take home, because I don't really do that naturally. So that's what I really want to do for myself.
Yep, that's great. Eric?
Really just, whenever I talk with AV professionals on different campuses, and whenever I talk with procurement people who buy this stuff, the issues are always common. And there's always a lot of good solutions for getting around things. What I can tell you is decide on a course of action and try to be as consistent as you can. And let the way you're going to handle problems derive from kind of what the core value you're trying to pull out of your solutions and your vendor relationships are. If you can figure out what's valuable, like what's valuable to Mike and I might not be valuable to some of the rest of you. I would hope we're somewhat consistent, but we're probably not, because our campus has different needs than yours. So really it's an introspective thing first. Figure out what you value with those relationships, and then try to drive those values into the relationship with your third parties.
Yeah, no, that's all great. That's great. One of the things I would want to close with is, on my notes for this session, I wrote down empathy, right? Walk a mile in another man's shoes. As you're at any point, and this is just general good life skill, right? But particularly when you're working with vendor relationships, have some empathy. Think about from their perspective, right? From the vendor's perspective, from the integrator's perspective. What are they looking for? What would be helpful to them? At any point in time, if you can be in your head, not only be thinking about what do I need to get out of this, what are our needs, what are our wants in this relationship, but also be thinking about, okay, how can we be thinking about what their needs are and what they might want to get out of this. You're really going to be coming ahead on where you want to go with those relationships and how you want to how you want to approach it and how you want to interact with them. So empathy, I guess that's where I would leave this with. So
yeah, one thing I can tell from this group right here is that 3 of us value razors far less than 1 of us. I can say that much.
Wow.
You need to get a beard and join the crew here, Joe.
I have a little goatee there. Yeah, I gave up on a lot of hair things a while ago. Let me rethink coming in to close this. Let's see. Yeah, build some insulation. Well, not Southern California. I can still get a suntan up here, and no, but actually, well, no, I have to wear a long sleeve shirt today, so Anyway, hey, thank you guys. My takeaway from this was that final mile. That was fantastic, and just keeping that in view, because I know personally that's kind of the issue I always seem to see as well. Is everything is great while the checks are flowing, right? And you get to that 75%, and then okay, that final, they're already gone and off. And so I really enjoyed that conversation. So thank you guys so much for this. This is just fantastic. I love this. So to everyone, this is the end of day 3. So hopefully you have gotten so much out of it, just the way this is taken off on the chat and social media, and the emails I've been receiving just constantly throughout the day have been fantastic. So thank you, everyone. And we pick it up again tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. Pacific and 11 a.m. Eastern, with staffing, HR, that type, the things, getting our office and our department rolling. So we're going to look at and dive into a study that we had done earlier this year, and looking at different ways that departments can be set up. So that should be a great conversation. Then, of course, we're going to finish it off at 9:30 Pacific, 12:30 Eastern, with our kind of coffee happy hour. Whether or not it's coffee in the cup is up to you. And by Mr. Gary Kay, who's going to be moderating that, of Rave Pub. So that should be a great session, and look forward to that tomorrow. So thank you, everyone, and have a good one. I feel like I closed out like I was closing a podcast.
All right. Thanks, everyone.